In the summer of 2022, the Serengeti wasn't its usual self. The skies held back their rain for far too long, and what was once a vibrant sea of golden grass slowly turned to cracked earth and silence. The wind carried dust instead of cool breezes, sweeping across the dry plains like a reminder of what was missing. Ponds vanished, streams stopped flowing, even the familiar watering holes, which animals had relied on for generations, shrank to muddy puddles or disappeared completely. With the drought worsening by the day, animals were forced to travel farther than ever to find something as simple and essential as water. Herds wandered in unfamiliar directions. Predators and prey often crossed paths not in conflict, but in quiet desperation, seeking the same rare resource. It was a time when survival blurred the usual rules of nature. Seeing this growing crisis, park rangers stepped in. Every few days, they loaded water tanks onto trucks and drove deep into the park to refill a single, deep well that had not yet dried up. It became a lifeline not just for the wildlife, but for the fragile balance of the ecosystem. The rangers returned every third day, faithfully, making sure the well stayed full. This story begins there, beside that well, where the heat was harsh, the dust thick. But hope still lingered for those willing to wait and fight for one more drink. Not far from the ranger's well, a mother lion and her cub had quietly made a home. They'd been separated from their pride, no one knew exactly how, but in times like these, survival didn't leave room for many choices. The mother, strong but clearly worn, had led her little one to the only place where life still flowed. The well the rangers kept filled. It wasn't much of a home. The ground was dry and shade was scarce, but there was water, and that made all the difference. For 2 weeks, they stayed close, drinking from the well, resting in the little patch of cool earth nearby. It became their quiet corner of the drought-stricken land. They weren't the only ones who'd found it. Animals from miles around, zebras, wildebeests, birds, even the occasional elephant came and went. The well had become a rare meeting point, a kind of quiet crossroads in the middle of a dry wilderness. And yet, despite the crowding, the mother lion stood her ground, always alert, always between danger and her cub. Their presence at the well wasn't just about thirst, it was about holding on, together, when the rest of the world had dried up. As the sun dipped low each evening, casting long shadows across the parched earth, the mother lion and her cub made their quiet journey back to the well. It had become a rhythm, simple, almost sacred. The heat of the day was too much to bear, but in those twilight hours, the world softened just enough for them to breathe a little easier. The cub, still young and full of energy, would often bound ahead, pouncing at insects or chasing the flicker of its own shadow. Everything was a game to him, every gust of wind, every patch of dust a new adventure. The mother, though tired and worn from days of watching and walking, never took her eyes off him. Her steps were slower, deliberate, and always protective at times. The cub would wander too close to the edge of the well, curious about the shimmer of water below, and without fail, the mother would let out a low growl, not harsh, but enough to pull him back. It was a routine born from love and caution, repeated every day without complaint, even in the hardest conditions. That bond never cracked. The midday sun might burn, and the nights might bring a hush too heavy to shake. But each evening at the well was a small reminder life still carried on. It wasn't grand or dramatic, it was quiet resilience. A mother doing what mothers do best, guiding, guarding, and giving just enough space for her little one to grow, even in the middle of a drought. One late afternoon, the calm routine at the well was shattered. From the horizon, a herd of elephants emerged, dust rising behind their heavy steps. They were thirsty, just like everyone else in the area. But something about this group felt different. Leading them was a massive bull elephant, his tusks curved like ivory sabers, and the tension in his shoulders spoke louder than any roar. Days without water had made him irritable, and the sight of two lions near the well, however peaceful, was more than he could bear. He let out a thunderous bellow and charged forward. The ground trembled. The mother lion snapped to attention, standing between the elephant and her cub. But the cub, still curious and playful, had ventured too close to the water. In one swift move, the bull elephant reached out with his trunk, wrapped it around the cub's small body, and lifted it off the ground. The air filled with panic. The cub writhed and clawed, its tiny paws grasping at nothing. The mother roared in desperation, pacing wildly, unsure how to intervene. Then, without warning, the elephant slammed the cub down into the water, its body splashing hard against the shallow pool. For a terrifying moment, all was still. The cub's limbs twitched, its breath was faint, and the mother, powerless against the towering beast, could only stand at the edge of the chaos, her eyes locked on her struggling child, in a place built on natural law and survival. It was a painful reminder sometimes. Even strength and love are not enough to stop the wild from being wild. Just when things seemed at their worst, help arrived in the most unexpected way. A rumble echoed through the heat as a water truck came into view, kicking up dust along the cracked trail. Behind the wheel was Ranger Mosey, on his usual route to refill the well. But what he saw that day was far from routine. From the driver's seat, he spotted the chaos: a massive bull elephant thrashing near the well, and a lioness pacing frantically beside it. Then he saw it, the cub, limp and soaking wet, clutched in the elephant's trunk. Without hesitation, Mosey slammed the brakes, jumped out of the truck, and grabbed the only thing he had: a long wooden stick. He didn't think twice. He ran straight toward the scene, waving the stick high and shouting with everything he had. The elephant turned, ears flared, clearly agitated, but Mosey didn't back down. Just a few feet away stood the mother lion, growling low, her eyes flicking between her cub and this strange human. And yet she didn't attack. For 10 tense minutes, it was a standoff: man, lion, and elephant. And then, finally, the elephant released its grip. The cub dropped to the ground with a splash. The lioness didn't hesitate. She lunged forward with a roar, chasing the elephant away from the well, away from her child. With the danger finally gone, Mosey didn't waste a second. He rushed to the soaked, shivering lion cub lying by the edge of the well. Its body was limp, its breath shallow and uneven. Gently, Mosey knelt down, placed his hands under the small frame, and lifted the cub into his arms. The fur was muddy and dripping wet, and the poor thing could barely move. Carefully, he carried it to the back of his truck, where he kept a basic medical kit. He laid the cub on a clean cloth, wiped away the dirt and water, and checked for visible injuries. With hands steady but heart racing, he drew up a dose of medicine meant to support circulation and reduce shock, then administered the injection with care, not far away. The mother lion stood still. She watched every move Mosey made. Her growls were soft now, more like a warning than a threat. She didn't charge, didn't flee. Somehow, she knew this man was trying to help. 10 long minutes passed. Then, just barely, the cub stirred. One paw twitched, an eye opened slowly. A weak sound came from its throat. Mosey exhaled, relief washing over him. He knew time was still critical. Without hesitation, he made a quick decision: both lions needed professional care. He would take them to the park's medical center together. At the park's medical center, a team of veterinarians quickly gathered as Mosey arrived with the lion cub cradled in his arms. They worked with quiet urgency, gently examining the cub's frail body, to everyone's relief. The injuries weren't as bad as they feared. A few scrapes along its legs, some bruising, but no broken bones. The real danger was exhaustion and stress. The team got to work right away. They cleaned the wounds with care, administered anti-inflammatory medication, and hooked the cub up to fluids to help rehydrate and stabilize its condition. The cub barely moved, but its heartbeat was steady, a good sign. Meanwhile, the mother lion was guided to a quiet enclosure nearby, though separated by a fence. She remained close enough to see her cub. She paced anxiously, ears perked and eyes fixed on every movement inside the clinic. The staff kept a respectful distance, careful not to provoke her natural instincts. Throughout the night, the team monitored the cub's vitals. By morning, the little lion began to stir, its eyes opened wider, and it even managed to lift its head. A few hours later, it accepted a small portion of food, proof that its strength was returning. 2 days later, with the sun rising over the Serengeti, it was finally time. After around-the-clock care and close monitoring, both the lioness and her cub had fully stabilized. The cub still had a slight limp, but he was moving on his own, curious again, alert and full of spirit. The mother lion had never taken her eyes off him, even once. The veterinary team gathered near the enclosure. They had done all they could, and now nature would take the next step, slowly. One of the staff members unlocked the gate. The mother stepped out first, cautious but calm. The cub followed, pausing only to look back for a brief second before bounding after her. They didn't run. They walked, side by side, back toward the wide, open grasslands that were once home, before disappearing into the tall, golden grass. The cub nuzzled his head under his mother's chin. She leaned down and returned the gesture, a quiet, intimate moment that left more than one set of eyes misty. Mosey stood nearby, watching silently, as the pair vanished into the wild. He knelt and gently stroked the spot where the cub had lain days earlier. His face said it all: relief, pride, and a quiet joy that needed no words. This story reminds us that even in the harshest corners of the wild, love still speaks the loudest. The bond between the mother lion and her cub wasn't just instinct, it was devotion, strength, and grace under pressure. And in the midst of it all stood Ranger Mosey, a quiet example of compassion in action. He didn't have armor or weapons, just courage, a steady hand, and a heart big enough to care. Moments like these remind us what it means to protect not just nature, but the connections that live within it. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. Thank you for joining us in this journey. If this story moved you the way it moved us, please consider liking and subscribing. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, stories of hope, kindness, and the quiet heroes who walk beside the wild.